How you guys doing tonight? Doing good? Man, I'm so excited to be here. Would it be okay if I prayed? Let me do that. And Father, thank you so much for this incredible opportunity to be together, to focus on the implications of everything that Build is building around and building upon. And Father, we pause in this moment, and pray for the nation of South Africa. Not only that there'd be a transformation in this nation that would give it a great future, that it would become a beacon across the entire continent and across the world of what it can look like when people come together. Father, I'm so grateful for Pastors Phil and Lucinda and their vision for the community of Hillsong. And God, how you have stretched your hand across the world and have created an entirely new understanding of how beautiful the church can be. We're so grateful, Father. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. You can have a seat. So I thought around the concept of Build and talking about the church's role in affecting a nation. I wanted to pull a particular passage. I did not grow up in the church. I became a follower of Jesus, in fact, 40 years ago this month. And it was the week I turned 20 years old. I had never been to a church in my entire life. I had never seen a Bible in my life. I didn't know anything really about who Jesus was. And when I entrusted my life to Jesus, I didn't know that there was a huge organization connected to him. I didn't know anything about Christianity. And so when I started reading the scriptures, I noticed that one of the things that I was encouraged to do was memorize the Bible. Anyone ever get those little cards with Bible verses on them? And so me and my brother, and it was interesting, he was an atheist and I was a mystic, and we both came to faith in the same summer. And so we started memorizing scriptures together whenever we would be driving to work, running out of gas, and asking Jesus to give us more miles than we had gas. So we learned faith very early. And we had memorized these verses, but we had no idea the context of the verses. Have you ever memorized a verse that you applied to your life that you had no idea the context in which it was actually declared? See, I think a part of the reason a lot of the verses in the Bible don't work is because we don't actually understand them. We pull them out of their context, hope they apply to us, and then wonder why they don't work. Or there's one that's beautiful, and I want to just destroy it tonight in your life. I want to wreck it and ruin it for you, because I think it's a verse that a lot of us have actually declared for ourselves, but it's not actually for us in the way that we've applied it. It's in Jeremiah chapter 29. Well, what happened? I don't know what happened, but was I funny? Oh. What? Oh, you knew? Are you like revealing my material before? Because, the magician's assistant is not supposed to pull the rabbit out of the hat. All right, in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. Oh, what a surprise. God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart." Now, I love that promise that God knows the plans he has for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, with a future and a hope. I mean, how many of us have not needed that declaration in our life? I mean, how many times in your life have you just needed to hold on to something and believe that tomorrow can be better than today? Well, one of the things that for me is really important, because when I became a follower of Christ and they gave me a Bible and I started reading this thing, and I was a philosophy student in college, and I started asking myself, how can I know that what it says about God is actually accurate? Because you can't really know in some empirical way what it says about God is accurate. So I thought what you can test is what it says about us. I can actually read the Bible, look at it as an anthropologist or a sociologist and know if it's accurately describing us as human beings. And one of the things that I found to be curious in the scriptures is that the scriptures tell us that it's impossible for human beings to live effectively without hope. That you may not believe in God, but you'd better believe in hope. Because the moment you stop hoping, you move to despair. There is no neutral. You either move forward with hope or you move backward into despair. And so I started wondering to myself, why is this such an integral part of being human? It's because one of the things we learned about hope, especially in Hebrews chapter 11, is that hope is actually something that only exists in the future. In fact, Paul tells us in the book of Romans that when you hope for something and you attain it, it's no longer a source of hope. How many of you are single? Anybody? Are you hoping to be married? See, what the scriptures actually say is that when you're hoping to be married, it actually pulls you forward. One day, I'm going to find him. One day, I'm going to find her. But then it says, but once you have that, it's no longer a source of hope. So once you're married, that part of it is no longer a source of hope, which is why so many marriages struggle. Because you were so hopeful that that marriage would solve all the issues of loneliness and disconnection in your heart, and it doesn't. And so hope, strangely enough, cannot exist in the past. That's called regret. Hope can only exist in the future. So the fact that in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 through 12, that it actually connects a future and a hope is because hope only exists in the future. And the future can only be well created by hope. They're integral. And one of the things that's important here, though, is that this verse a lot of times gives us a mythology of the future because it says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans of welfare and not calamity, with the future and hope. So we think, oh, okay, so God is the only one involved in the future, not us. Now, I'm a Latino from El Salvador. And so in the Latin world, we have a phrase called si Dios quiere, which means if God wills. It's sort of like our Latin way of saying, it's not my responsibility. If God wants it to happen, it'll happen. And it's sort of a hit and miss thing. You're going to get a job, si Dios quiere. If God wills. You're going to pay that bill, si Dios quiere. Right? If God wills. You're going to go to church, si Dios quiere. You're going to ask her out? Absolutely. Right? So it varies based on what you want and what you don't want. And so there's a passive relationship to the future. And so many of us have this view, well, you don't want to act like you have a role in the future, but I want you to realize that a part of being human is the way God has designed you in relationship to the future. That in the same way that bees create hives and ants create colonies, humans create futures. Silkworms don't think about creating silk, they just create silk. Bees don't think about creating honey, they just create honey. It's intrinsic to their nature. Human beings don't sit around and think about how they just naturally create futures, but I'm telling you, you are creating futures right now. Every choice you make eliminates a future and creates a new one. And so even though God is the God of the future, you're created in the image of God. And because of that, you can do what no other species can do. You can see something that does not exist, and you can actually materialize that into reality. And so we ask questions that expose this. Like when you talk to a little 8-year-old boy, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to play for the Springboks, right? Or he might say, I want to play for the All Blacks. And you'll say, you're not my child. And because you expect them to have a dream of a better future. I want to be president of the nation. I want to be an NBA basketball player. Isn't it odd that children only aspire toward greatness? No child says, I want to go to the Olympics and come in fourth. I want to be just short of getting a medal. I want to go for the bronze. That just wouldn't work. It's just not a theme that works, is it? I want to be vice president. No one ever says that. Because there's something intrinsic in human beings that imagines a future that is greater than who we are. better than who we are, different than the world we know. So we're designed with this intimate relationship to the future. But here's the problem, I think, is that we have misapplied this passage of Scripture. We've taken this as a promise of prosperity as the people of God. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans of welfare, prosperity, and not destruction. So I want you to go up with me, and I want you to see the context of this promise. Because remember, the people of Israel have been dispersed all across the world. They are under Babylonian captivity. They are slaves. They have no material for hope in their lives. They're filled with despair. And here is how God is going to play it out. Not the way they expected. Beginning in verse 1, this is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Let me summarize that verse. It was a really, really bad day. And you think South Africa has problems. Never think that a nation has problems too big for God. This was after King Jehoiakim and the queen mother, the court officials, and the leader of Judah in Jerusalem, the skilled workers and the artisans had gone into exile from Jerusalem. He entrusted the letter to Elisha, son of Shaphan, and to somebody else named John, son of the Smiths, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. It said this: "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." This is so important, because what God is actually saying to them is what you think has happened by accident has actually happened by intention. You think that you're living in an imperfect present because you are exiled across the Babylonian Empire, but I want you to know that you are a part of an intentional strategy of bringing the world to myself. God says, I am here in this moment. I carried you from Jerusalem to Babylon. Why? Because your life is bigger than you. And this promise is bigger than you. So here's the strategy. Do you want to know how to have a future and a hope? Do you want to know how to see the fulfillment of prosperity and not calamity? Step 1, verse 5. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. God says to the Israelites who are begging God to get them out of Babylon, begging God to set them free from the Babylonian Empire, begging God to restore what they believed was the ideal circumstance for their life. And God said, stop waiting for a future day. Make a home here. See, the way that we're supposed to build a nation is to make that nation our home. I think a huge part of what has paralyzed the church is a theology that says that one day Jesus is going to come back and then everything's going to get better. It's very personal. When you die, you're going to go to heaven, so just hang on and survive. And it's historic for the church. One day Jesus is going to come back and he's going to start everything all over again. So let's just hold on through history. But what if God left us here not to survive history, but to create history, to write history, and to create a future? So here's strategy number 1. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Make Babylon your home. You can quote me on that. It's because I think it's so funny. Every time Christians talk about Babylon, it's always something we should hate. Right? Babylon is usually the imagery of everything evil. And yet here God is saying, make Babylon your home. You build houses there, plant gardens there. Stay there. Stop acting like you're better than the world I put you in. Make the world you're in better. I do think it's interesting. There's this urbanologist in the United States named Richard Florida, and he's been noticing that there's a cultural shift in our society. I don't know if it's true here or not. That where once people would leave their church or community for a job promotion, now people are turning down job advancement and keeping their place. They would rather have a place than have wealth. They would rather have a people than to have success. They consider success having a place and a people. I do think it's interesting that there are, I've seen sociologically two different kind of dynamics. People who move through life based on their career and then find a church wherever their career takes them. And then there are other people who decide that the epicenter of their life is their church, their community, their people. And then they build a career around their relationships. See, I think the future is going to be built by churches that are not visited by people who are passing through on their career journey, but the future is going to be built by people who make people the center of their story and then build their career around that. So he says that we need to make a home here. The future will be built on people who plant, who stay, who fight. We know this intrinsically in other arenas of life. I mean, what would you think if the Springboks decided, I think we can do better if we move to Wellington? I think we're going to take our team and we're going to have spring training in Sydney. What would happen is, I think we're going to represent South Africa, but we're not going to live in South Africa. See, I think very quickly there would be a disconnection. And yet the church so oftentimes acts like it's just visiting rather than belonging. The church needs to decide to make a home here, to build our lives where we are. And then he says, not only should we make a home here, but we need to build a future here. Verse 6. It says, marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. All right, I want to be obedient to the scriptures. And it says, find wives for your sons. Aaron, could you please stand up? Would you turn around, please? Okay. No. I just need you to face. Okay. All right. This is my son, Aaron, and he's 29. And he's single. And I'm taking him all over the world in search of his wife. Because clearly there are not enough single women in Los Angeles. And I'm just trying to fulfill the promise here. But I need him to cooperate. Why does it say marry your sons and daughters? Because, you see, they kept putting life on hold because they didn't have the life they wanted. And this is the way God is saying, no, you need to have your sons and daughters in Babylon. It's really disturbing to me when the church creates a language that acts as if we're not a part of our cities. One of the guys running for president in the last election came to my house. And we sat in the backyard, and he was working on some other projects, and I've worked in the film industry, so he was there talking to me about a film project. And he kept saying, we need to stand up against them. We need to do this against them. We need to do this against them. And after a while, I finally said, hey, could you tell me who we is? Because I don't know that we're we. I think that you're we and that I'm them. Because he kept saying, Hollywood, Hollywood, Hollywood. And I said, no, you understand, I don't live in Hollywood. I am Hollywood. And if you're here against them, you're here against me. Because they're my people, and I'm their people. And I think what happens is that we keep trying to use the language of being aliens and strangers to justify our lack of commitment to build a future here. See, we should be committed to creating the best future for wherever we are. It is your moral responsibility to build a better South Africa. It's not simply your moral responsibility to build a better church. Of course, you don't have to, but then the promise of a future and a hope will not be yours. Because that future and a hope, that prosperity, that welfare, and not destruction and calamity only comes when you decide to make a home here and to build a future here. And that future is tricky. I was asked to come as a consultant to a church in the LA area. It was a massive church, and it was an all-Caucasian church, an all-white church. And I was in a room with their leaders, and they wanted to ask me some questions about how our church became so integrated. We have 40, 50, 60 different nationalities at Mosaic, but that's been true for 20 years. It's not a new thing for us. And as I was sitting in the room, and they were saying, we want more, more blacks in our church, and more people like you, Latinos in our church. And I said, okay, well, I just have one question for you, and then we can work right through this. What's that? I said, are you willing to let your sons and your daughters marry Latinos and blacks? And it got really, really quiet in the room. And the consultation was over. Because every time they talked about blacks, they were talking about how they went to work with poor black people. And I said, I just need to get clarification. I mean, this is so noble of you and as affluent, educated white people to go work with people who are impoverished and less educated. But are you telling me you don't have a single black family on your street? And they look so confused. I said, you mean there's not even one Latino family that has accomplished enough in their life to live in your neighborhood? Well, yeah. And I said, you see, this is the problem. You want to go serve someone who you feel is beneath you because it makes you feel good about yourself. But there is a person who's different than you on the same street who's your equal. And you don't want to invite him to the barbecue. And the realities of the church, see, what we're supposed to be is the future of humanity. See, we're not just supposed to make a home here, we're supposed to build a future here. But what that means is that we're supposed to be what the future looks like. See, when people look at the church, now here's the dilemma. Most of the time people look at the church are looking at the past. But remember, there is no hope in the past. So we can preach hope all we want, but when we walk into buildings where the music is 200 years old, and the dress code is 50 years old, and the culture is 1,000 years old, and the language is 1,500 years old, what you're actually communicating is that you're hopeless. Because you're holding on to the past rather than creating the future. See, one of the things I don't even know if you know you're doing as Hillsong, and I know not all of you are Hillsong, so I'm just going to say this for a moment. The fact that you've created so much new music, the fact that you've brought in technology and innovation and creativity and artistry, without even saying a word, you're communicating hope because you are creating a future rather than preserving a past. Build a future here. And then the last thing, and this is maybe the most important one. This is the one that I think is going to disturb us the most, or maybe excite us the most, right? Verse 7. Here's a verse that wasn't in the Bible yesterday. I'm putting it here right now for the very first time. Because the way we've been living for the past 150 years, it's as if this verse wasn't here. So somehow we erased it to get to the part we wanted. It says, also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it. Here it is. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So God says, here's the trick. If you are prospering without your city prospering, this is not God blessing you, this is you stealing from your city. Because God only blesses through one process. You bless your city, and you make sure it prospers. And when it prospers, you too will prosper. Why is it that across the Western world, people do not see churches as a gift to their communities? In fact, zoning laws do everything they can to stop churches because churches have been environmental, economic, social, and cultural black holes that have taken from their cities but not poured into their cities. I was at an event with a retreat with these movie producers and directors, and all of them were people of faith, well, most of them. And one of them knew about Mosaic, our church in LA, and actually liked us, even though they'd never been there. I find that, and to be interesting. You know there are people who love Hillsong who have never been here because they've met someone from Hillsong. So I love the fact that there are people who've never been to Mosaic, but they love Mosaic, even though they've never been and they have no plans to come. But they've met people. And she said, I love Mosaic. I love what you guys are doing at Mosaic, but don't ruin it. And I said, well, we're trying not to, but what do you mean? And she goes, don't let it get too big, because then you'll ruin it. And I said, okay, so in your mind, the church can get too big and it'll be ruined. She goes, yes. I said, okay, have you ever had that thought about like the Peace Corps? Have you ever thought to yourself, I hope the Peace Corps doesn't get too big because it'll just ruin it? Or did you ever have that mindset about, I don't know, UNICEF? I hope it doesn't get too big or because it'll just ruin it. And I said, have you ever had that thought about any organization in the world that you thought was actually beneficial to humanity? She was, not that I can think of. I mean, anybody ever go, man, I love Netflix, but don't make it too big. It'll ruin it. See, everything we actually value, we want it to grow. That's why I said the reason you don't want the church to grow is because at your core, you think the church is a parasite, not a gift. Because if you believed that the church made the world better, you would want it to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And here's how we change this view. He says, also seek the peace and prosperity of the city. See, this Build conference is not intentionally, but it is the pathway to true prosperity. Because if we will give ourselves to the peace and prosperity of our city, then we cause them to prosper. And through that, God causes us to prosper. See, the reason most cynics of the faith wonder if we're committed to simply being rich or wealthy off religion is because we tend to lean first to our desire for God to prosper us. And then we make secondary, even when we're noble, God's intention to bless others. And the order is simply wrong. Our intention should be that God would prosper and bring peace to the city, even if we have no peace and no prosperity. But I love the promise, pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And then he says, this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. Wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if all over South Africa people were sending you emails and making phone calls saying, please bring the church to our city? Because everywhere the church is, the city is transformed. Everywhere where the church is, businesses thrive. Everywhere the church is, families are made stronger. Everywhere the church is, children are being educated. Everywhere the church is, there's hope and meaning. We can't even explain what's going on. We just know wherever the church is, there's peace and prosperity. See, I think we have a historic opportunity. We live in a moment where it is so clear that governments cannot bring peace and prosperity. We live in a moment where we've realized that not even education can bring to us the kind of future that humanity longs for. We live in a moment where people have moved to a despairing cynicism that says nothing is going to change. And here we are. And we do so well in the darkness, because that is the place where we shine best. So let's build a future and a hope, not for us, because you see, we don't have to build a future for ourselves, because our future is in the hands of the God who builds the future. We give ourselves to the prosperity and peace of those who do not know him, and then we watch what God will do in us and through us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, come on, let's really thank Pastor Erwin. Just so good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just love that thought, and I think it's a huge challenge for all of us sometimes in our thinking, isn't it? Just so many of the things you challenged today. Hey, you guys can grab your seat, and we're just going to have a moment and answer some questions. But yeah, just that whole thought of changing our thinking from my personal peace and prosperity, God wants to prosper me, to how do I help the city and nation prosper? It is how, let me just start by asking this question. In outworking of that in the Mosaic community that you guys have established in a building within Los Angeles and quite close to the whole Hollywood scene and all of that, how have you had to, how has your thinking changed, or how have you connected into that community?
Well, for me, it was even at the inception. In the early 80s, when I was a very young follower of Christ, I was an urbanologist and I worked as a futurist. And I did an assessment of the world. And I asked myself the question, what is the most influential piece of ground on the planet? And I found this letter that said, please send me all the information you can on Los Angeles, for it is the future of capitalism. And it was signed Karl Marx. And as I looked at the world, I realized that Los Angeles was the epicenter of human creativity, that the human spirit is formed by story and narrative. And so I before I even married my wife, I told her, said, hey, well, a non-negotiable for me as I'm moving to LA. I didn't move to LA because of celebrities. I didn't move to LA because of fame and all the things because actually Hollywood is kind of a really trashy city. And it's not the kind of, I just want to walk down Hollywood Boulevard. It's like you walk down there once, I'm going to throw these shoes away. And it's crazy, and it's insane, and it's dark. And I love the city. But I picked that place because I felt it was the epicenter of humanity's future. So I didn't move to LA simply to try to reach LA. I believe that if LA could, LA inhales the world and could exhale the gospel. So I went there because I felt like if I could have any effect for the gospel in Los Angeles, I could put inside of the DNA of LA the gospel, and it would spread across the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just a little vision. Okay, who else has a question for Erwin. Okay, do we have some
It's
microphones?
MC3 that you want.
Yep, over here. There's a gentleman. I just can't see anyone with microphones going to where that person is. So there we go, Jovan. Look at him running like a high performance machine that he is. Okay, so the gentleman with the microphone. Sorry, you've handed two microphones, but this gentleman here.
Maybe if you'll stand when you ask your questions, it'd be great.
Hello, thank you so much for your preach. It was amazing, and the whole day today has been incredible. I work in the film industry, and you mentioned film earlier, and my heart really is to repurpose the industry for the kingdom. What kind of advice can you give from your involvement in the film industry? Is it purely changing content, or is it also changing the whole way movies are made for the kingdom?
Yeah, one of the great challenges, and I think most of us are aware of this, is that the word Christian is synonymous with average. And so if you have Christian music or Christian film or Christian art, it's pretty much in the industry would be synonymous with average. And I remember even like bringing a lot of scripts and talking to a lot of huge production companies. They would literally tell me, "Oh, this is too artistic. We're looking for low-hanging fruit." And because what sells with Christians is really like low art. And it has to have like the gospel in it really clearly. And the problem is not that we don't need more movies that somewhere in the middle someone gives their life to Jesus. I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's just, wow, there's like a movie with Tom Hardy, Nick Nolte. What was it, Aaron? The Warrior to me.
Yes.
Warrior.
Cage fighting.
If you wanna like watch a great movie that carries a faith narrative, I think Warrior is the best movie that has been made in the last 10 years. And but we don't.
There's an Aussie in it, Joel
Edgerton.
Joel Edgerton.
Yeah, he's great in it as well.
Thought I'd mention that.
And that's why I didn't mention him. I didn't want to go there. But I think what we need is we need Christians who are able to tell the human story well. Because the problem is that when you watch a Christian movie, you wonder, have they ever met a human? And because they don't seem to know humans well. And I think we need to understand the human spirit better. We need, and this is like when I would write my books early on, I would read Stephen King's book On Writing every time before I would write my books. And to remind myself to tell the truth. It is so difficult to tell the truth. It's terrifying to tell the truth. It takes time to see the truth. And I know as Christians we always talk about objective truth versus subjective truth, but I probably have the opposite view. And because I think the most valuable truth is actually subjective, not objective. I think we pretend to have objective truth. We talk about space, but now we know it's dark matter, but we still call it space as if there's nothing there. We think objective truth is our present understanding of reality. Truth exists in God. Jesus said, "I am the truth." I don't know how more subjective that can be. It's just that we're not the subject. And he is the subject of truth. He is the source of truth. To me, truth isn't data, and truth is essence. And we need to learn how to tell the truth about being human, and then we'll become great storytellers and great filmmakers. So.
Mind exploding. My wife likes Hallmark movies.
They're beautiful. And my wife watches all those, and we watched them during Christmas. Hey,
yeah.
I love Downton Abbey. And then I love things that I shouldn't love. Mm-hmm. And I love a whole spectrum of stories, and we need them all. We need them all. And so I'm not, but they need to be told beautifully and told well.
If I go back to even as I read the Bible, like the stories in the Bible are graphic,
Really?
painful. They're not perfect stories, and yet we've tried to make everything fit into this little perfect world.
When Aaron was a little boy, he probably doesn't remember this, maybe his first time in like Sunday school or something, they studied King David, and Aaron came home and said, David was a pervert.
Well, it's true.
And a man after God's own heart. And we're good at telling the part about him being a man after God's own heart, and we lie about the rest of it. You see, the truth is we lie about what's in the Bible.
Or we ignore it.
That's a lie.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm sorry. I'm feeling way too comfortable with you.
Brilliant. Okay, who had another question here?
Good evening. My contribution is not so much a question, but I'm sure a question is hidden in what I've got to say this evening. We as a family, we are truly grateful and thankful that we are planted here at Hillsong, Cape Town, because we are formerly from Durban. And we've been truly blessed in this ministry for the past 4 years. And I believe that every single person that's seated here tonight are the privileged few. So the question is every single individual here, if they decided to go home tonight and made a decision that to empower one, so which means whatever gifts, whatever talents, whatever experience you have, if you chose one person and said, right, I am going to empower this one person, and the only condition to that person is that when you are able, then you empower somebody else. Thank you.
It's a great thought, and I love that. And I don't know if you have any comment on that. I think the challenge in the church today is that sometimes we consume so much without understanding our responsibility to pass it on to others. How do you guys encourage that in Mosaic?
I'm sorry. I usually don't respond to statements as much because they're declarations, so I just want to let them breathe. But I think one of the realities is that breathing is both inhaling and exhaling. I had a hard time learning how to swim because they told me to breathe when I turned my head out of the water. And so I never exhaled. And so I didn't know how to swim because I would be holding my breath the whole way, because when I turned my head, I couldn't inhale because I had not exhaled. I was just holding my breath. It took me like 50 years to realize, oh, you're supposed to breathe, not just inhale. And the problem is that worship has been consumed by music. And so we call worship singing. And so we've turned worship into inhaling, which is why the church is suffocating to death. Because if all the church does is sing as worship, but doesn't serve as worship, we're just basically going to die.
Mind blown. Just keeps happening. Okay. Who's got another question? That was brilliant. Yes. Where are we? Over here.
Hey, Pastor Erwin, thank you so much for truth you've shared. What I wanted to ask is, as you read the scripture there and explained everything, there was a process in time. You know what I mean? Like God said the promise, and then over time, it would get fulfilled. So how would you say, when I leave here and go back to my job or my church, how would I keep the flame, so to say, burning in terms of this hope for the process until I see the promise come to pass? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And okay. One of the things that came to mind right away is in LA, everyone has a temporary job. Like when you ask someone, hey, what do you do? They go, oh, well, I'm just doing this. And they don't have a career, they have a job, which basically means I'm not giving everything I have to it. And if you treat a job like a job rather than a career, you'll never have a career. Because you have to make a home there. And so if you're a barista, or if you're a carpenter, or if you're a substitute teacher, or whatever you're doing, you need to act like it's the most important career move of your life. I don't know why, but even early on, like I worked construction, I worked as a carpenter, I worked as a lumberjack, I worked as a librarian. I installed, installation in houses. I picked oranges. I've been fired by almost every employer in the world. But every job I had, I told myself, I cannot take a paycheck if I'm not willing to give everything. Because for me, a paycheck is a social contract that you get everything I've got. And so I think one of the ways of applying Make a Home here is whatever you're doing right now, you do it as if it was your mandate from God. Rather than going, when I get the job I really want, then I'll really give my passion and give my talent, give my creativity.
And I think the challenge is as well is, and this is in the context. I think it can be the context globally. I know it can be the case in South Africa that you can look and see so much need or so much challenge that you can just get overwhelmed. And even if you feel like, man, we've been working away, we've been giving our best, and it still seems a long way off. How do you? What's that internal fire to keep going?
I think one of the things that is important to remember is that human beings are what sociologists called open loop creatures, which means that we're affected by other people. So if you walk into a room and you're really optimistic and everyone's depressed, you walk out depressed. If you walk in a room, you're really depressed, but you get around optimistic people, you might walk out really optimistic. Have you ever had that happen to you? And it's because we're open loop, which is really important because God speaks into that open loop. And the reason I bring this up is because, look, you help one person, and what you don't realize is you're actually affecting the environment of humanity. You're not just helping that one person, you're changing the environment of what it means to be human. And you don't know what the tipping point is. So you may go, oh, I'm only helping this one person. You may be the singular last tipping point that shifts an entire nation. And remember, like the Roman Empire was once huge. They were the Beatles. The Egyptian Empire one time looked like it was never going to end. The Greek Empire was established so quickly that Alexander didn't even know what to do with the rest of his life. And those empires no longer exist.
Wow.
There was a tipping point where those empires actually expanded, and a tipping point when they came to an end. There'll be a day, 1,000 years from now, where people will not be able to imagine a South Africa that wasn't united and prosperous. And what you want to do is make sure historians have to grind their teeth because they have to explain that the church was in the middle of that tipping point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. Love that thought. And it's the long game. And I've just been thinking about this as well, just the whole idea of what are we doing today is we're trying to lift the conversation. We're trying to say there is hope when the conversation that sometimes we can find ourselves engaged in around South Africa can be quite negative.
I mean, even just look at Hillsong. I mean, Brian and Bobby labored and labored and labored and labored and labored, and they were just a church. Yeah. And I know 20 years ago, sociologists were not saying Hillsong is going to be one of the next global movements. And then there was a tipping point. And now it's everybody going, wait a minute, how's Hillsong doing this? And it's almost as if you have to step back and go, you pushed the boulder up the mountain, and no one was cheering you on. And then the boulder starts rolling down the other side of the mountain and everyone's running after you. Yeah, wow. It's the hard work. It's the determination. It's the sweat. It's the resilience. It's the faith. It's the courage. It's the determination when everyone else says it cannot be done. And no one will applaud you through that stage. But believe me, when you hit the tipping point, everyone will want to be you.
Yeah. So good. So good. Okay. We've got time for one more question. Jonas, yes. We'll have two more because Steph has had her hand up. So, Jonas, yes.
Yeah, so good. So, I think we all are so inspired by today. It's really been incredible. Maybe I should stand as you asked. The one big challenge that comes to mind is we've all received this phenomenal amount of information. But my question is, how do we develop the patience along with all of this knowledge and everything that we are called to do to push that boulder up the hill so that we can see the fulfillment of the potential that sits in this room tonight? Does that make sense?
I mean, one thing I would say to that is what we just discussed a moment ago, which is, I think, who you associate with. So my hope that from a day like today is that there would be relationships formed, connections formed that would facilitate an environment that would encourage you to keep going. So that there would be friends in this room, acquaintances, people who you would get to know, who you would say, hey, come on, don't give up, keep going. There is a brighter day, there is a belief, there is a vision that we are committed to, and we may have lost a battle here, but ultimately we believe we're going to win the war. Yeah. And so I think that really a whole lot of that comes down to your relational connections. So you've really got to ask yourself, are the relational spheres that I am finding myself in helping to feed that deep inner belief that we can bring about change? Or is this just a one-off and I'll wait till next year, get inspired again, and then go back to all my normal, or all those other relationships and conversations, and nothing really changes? So my hope is that the development out of this would be communities, groups, gatherings, encouragement, and it would become an ongoing kind of chain. That, if you're part of a local church, that you'd gather in that local church, and my hope would be that you would be encouraged and inspired and filled with hope in that environment on a Sunday. But at smaller group level, there would be people who you would connect with who would say, forget just what we read about or hear about, we actually have a deeper sense of belief, and would share encouraging stories. That's one of the things that we really try to do. Earlier today, we showed Yolisa's story about how we're engaging with her having a better education, and we believe that is she's going to pay that forward, and who knows how many lives will be impacted from that one life. So continuing to build on those stories and see the benefit of what has happened there is a part of it, and maybe you want to add to that.
No, that's a great response, and I was just intrigued by the statement when you said we have time for one more question, but you gave an answer, so we had time for the answer as well. And no, but I think this is connected to your question.
Right. I'm listening. Mind blown.
So many times, have you ever read the Old Testament and wondered why, if God promises victories, the Israelites were hesitant to fight? No?
Yeah.
That's just me?
No.
Isn't it odd? You know why they were hesitant to fight? Because some of them were going to die. See, when we read the Bible, we never in our mind perceive any Israelites dying in the wars they win. See, I think a part of the problem is that we're so individualistic that we want our personal victories rather than our communal tribal victory. And the truth is that in every great war, the front lines fall. And we have to choose to be the front lines of creating a better world. And so we may not succeed. We may fail. We may end with so many wounds and frustrations and disappointments, but our blood will point in the direction of a better world. Yeah. And I think that's a part of the power of it. See, when Pastor Phil said, there's time for one more question, everyone knew that the answer would also come. We need to believe that when we ask God to act, that the end isn't the question, that the final is his response.
Yeah, so good, so good. Thank you. All right, we've got time for one more question. and it's Steph.
Thank
Here
you.
we go.
This has just been burning throughout the day, and I thought, jumping off the back of that, it's a great moment. So I'm just wondering how we can encourage people to move from personal morality, even past social justice, to they will be my people and I will be their people or person, and to move past nobility or a do good, feel good giving moment into an ongoing relationship that's ultimately building others' lives first, and out of that, naturally our own. I'm just wondering how you've seen that take place on an individual and also a communal, like in a city and church level, and in your own life. Like, when did that mindset and lifestyle switch over for you?
This one's yours.
I know there's another answer coming after mine, so
That was a great question. That's like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can hold the question in my brain.
yeah, look, I mean, that is what today is all about. How do we do that? And I don't think we're going to walk away from here with all the answers. To me, if today challenges you to think differently about how you live your life, and if you are a person of faith, how you live out that faith, and understand at a deeper level your responsibility in what we can build together, then to me, today's been a success. To go beyond that is to create, I suppose you could call it, like this army of people who have this similar mindset, and others jump on board with that because they see it modeled, because they see examples of it, because it gets spoken about, because they see the results of it, and it becomes more and more a part of who we are and how we live. And that is taken and happens over time, and that happens from continually talking about something and repeating it and living it and sharing and celebrating. And it doesn't happen easily, but I believe it does happen. I believe we have stories of it already happening, but I believe there's a whole lot more that we need to happen. And so if that is where we're heading, like Erwin said, if the blood is pointing in the direction of where we want to go, then that is the way it should be. And we should all take that as a win. And if there are things that you are dissatisfied with, then again, I would say, well, what are you going to do about that? So how do I help others to see this deeper level of being part of a significant transformation? What is my responsibility in helping to facilitate that and encouraging that to develop? So, yeah. And final answer to the final question.
Well, you asked like it was layered in layers of questions. And
it was written down,
okay.
Which is always
a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that's a big question that's coming up.
It was probably a week ago when Aaron and I were talking. He always wants to talk either church or scriptures, and he said, I don't think God cares about our sin. I think God cares about the devastation of our sin on us and others. Yeah, he's not like up there like counting sins. He sees the effect on us. And I thought that was such a human insight, because I think most of us almost feel like God's a judge, and rather than a father. And so there's an interconnection between the layers in which we see the human problem. And we all seem to engage at different levels. Like genocide seems to move us all. And then war moves many of us. And then murder moves some of us. And then violence moves fewer of us. And then hatred moves some of us. And then bitterness moves some of us. And then unforgiveness. But we don't actually see the human fractal of sin. That we ignore unforgiveness and don't realize that it keeps replicating itself all the way to genocide. And that's why it's we have to deal with the big issues, but we also have to deal with the intimate issues of the human heart. Because you can't end war if you don't deal with hate. And you can't end hate if you don't deal with unforgiveness. Because the truth is, you will always be hurt and wounded by someone. And so it will, if we don't deal with the part of it that's us, we will become the fountainhead of a darker future. And so I look at it in maybe in two ways. I feel like one of the things that Pastor Phil, that you do so well is you communicate a message of hope. You don't really preach against things, you preach for things. And I feel like that's one of the things that we resonate in a very similar way. I preach for a humanity, not against a humanity. But I don't naively disconnect the issues of the human heart from the issues of human history, because they're interconnected. They're interwoven, and they have to be solved together. And a lot of people want to try to solve the big problems without solving the small problems, but we are the big problem. It's humans who go to war. It's humans who are driven by greed. It's humans who create injustice. It's humans who allow poverty to exist. The problems that we blame on God are human problems. And so I feel like for us, a part of, this is the way I see it, I try to address the big issues when I'm preaching out and the small issues when I'm preaching in. I try to deal with the intimate issues of my heart as a human being, and then try to call us to a new humanity as a whole, because it's a challenge, And I was talking to this really famous, really gifted artist, musician, grew up in faith, became an atheist through a lot of wounds and pains in his life. And the first time we met, every other word was F you, Every other word was F this and F that and F that. And in between and, but, F this. And then, and after about 30 minutes, he looked at me and goes I know you're really offended by, my profanity. And I said, no. I said, you care so much about what I think of you that you intentionally are profane. And I think you need to care less about what I think of you. And I said, I don't care about your profanity. I care about your indifference. And I said, be as profane as you want. Do something to make the world better. And because sometimes we hide behind our profaneness to hide our indifference. And what we want to do is to impact our indifference, and it will transform our profaneness. Because if you never use one profane word and never do anything good for another human being, you have lived a profane life. But if you struggle with profanity, but you get up every day to try to make someone's life better, I think you've told a beautiful story of your own brokenness, but the refusal to allow your brokenness to absolve you from healing the world.
Mind blown. Okay, here's just one final thought that I would say. Moving to South Africa, being here almost 9 years now, has challenged my understanding of the gospel. Because what I realized is the gospel message, the good news of Jesus, of what he represents, of who he is, of our response to him, should be about more than just a personal savior, as much as it is about that. I believe the gospel should uplift communities and cities. And I've begun to understand this more and more, because here's the challenge. If someone comes into any one of the churches represented here, or one of our locations, and says, I want to know Jesus, and begins that journey of faith, but they don't have a job, what are they going to do from Monday to Friday? Well, they're going to try to live out this faith, but if they can't get a job, it doesn't matter how much they try to live out their faith. At some point, they're probably going to end up getting caught up in some things which are not helpful for them, their future, or the future of others. But imagine if this gospel message is, yes, I want to know God, I want to understand who Jesus is, I want to walk as a person of faith. And then through their church connection, I don't have a job, but it's like, hey, we can help you get a job. Can I tell you what is as transforming as their inner heart being in relationship with God? Their practical world will be changed because they got a job which brings a level of wealth into their home. And because of their faith, they see themselves differently. They understand things like character and responsibility, and all that grows into them. And so this transition starts to change within them that is on a whole lot of different levels. And I think what we're trying to do and trying to say here is our Christian faith has to be far more than just what I experience on a Sunday, or even what I experience personally in my Bible reading. But how do I live this out in a way that when someone who has come from a completely broken, lost, or I don't have a job, whatever it is, world, how do we present the gospel in a way that brings their life up, and as it lifts their life, who knows how many lives are impacted because they represent a family, and that family could then be changed because they connect to another family, and on it goes. And to me, that is more and more my understanding of the power of what the gospel message of Jesus should be all about. And that we should be doing our best to carry that and understand how do we play our part in seeing that outworked. So, yes, I got one. Thank you, everyone. Round of applause for Pastor Erwin McManus.